This week, we are witnessing a unique phenomenon across this country. Protests about Palestine and Gaza on over 36 campuses, including many prominent universities. Hundreds, if not thousands, of students are for the first time protesting our foreign policy, particularly their own institutions' investment in Israel. In the last 2 to 3 weeks, over 1,000 students and almost a dozen professors have been arrested. Police have been called in on multiple campuses. Today we'll discuss 3 parts: a brief history of student activism in America, what we say about these protests, and advice for those participating. The history of student protests in America is iconic, often seeing students on the right side of justice, such as during the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War protests. The student protests against the Vietnam War were particularly impactful, leading to significant political pressure and changes in policy. More recent protests include those against apartheid in South Africa in the 1980s, which also led to significant changes on a global scale. Current student protests are focused on the university's financial investments in Israel, recognizing these institutions' substantial endowments and influence. These institutes are directly bankrolling what many see as an apartheid regime, prompting students to protest against investments in what they view as human rights violations. Now, moving to the Islamic perspective on such protests, it's important to acknowledge the diversity of opinions within the faith about the appropriateness and method of protest. My view is that activism is part of our religious duty, provided it is conducted within the bounds of Islamic ethics and morality. It is critical to engage pragmatically in protests, ensuring they aim for positive change while adhering to Islamic principles, even in a diverse and challenging environment. Lastly, while it's valid to critique aspects of protests that conflict with Islamic practices, it's also essential to be realistic and supportive of the overarching goals of justice and fairness. The activism of today's students is shaping the future, potentially influencing tomorrow's leaders to foster a world more aligned with justice and equity.